Good morning, Rabotai. Welcome to Breakfast in the Class. A special shout out to some new people that we have with us here. Hazaka Baruch, Danny. Hazaka Baruch, wonderful. Is this your first one?
My first one.
Psh, wow, long time listener, first time caller. This is amazing. We got the boys in the house. Baruch Hashem. Okay, Hazaku Baruch. It's always wonderful to see everybody at Breakfast in the Class. Breakfast in the Class today is dedicated to loving memory of Ricky Fenster, Lunishmat Rezel Cyril Bat Michael Leib, Alea Shalom, sponsored by our son, Dr. Daniel Fenster, as well in loving memory of Mara's son, Lili Nishmat, Moshe Ben Adel, for his 12-month Askara, sponsored by his son, Sammy Sutton, Ruach HaNayt Nichenu Began Eden. Dedicated in loving memory of Gabri Safra, Alea Shalom, Lili Nishmat, Gabi Bat Esther Yaakub, whose Shiv'ah just finished, sponsored anonymously. Ruach HaNayt Nichenu Began Eden. Dedicated loving memory of Alan Rosenberg, Lilu Nishmat Yehuda Ben Lorraine, sponsored by Jack and Scott, also whose Shiv'ah just ended yesterday. Sponsored by Michelle Golbari, dedicated in honor of her nephew, baby Golbari's Brit Milah. Baruch Hashem, we have a simcha. Baruch Hashem is wonderful. And in loving memory of Ms. Lily Safra, Lilu Nishmat Leah Bat Chana. And finally, Breakfast and the Cold Brew, sponsored by David E. Ash, in honor of you and your substantial capacity to do good today and every day. And you should visit the new website, capacityforgood.com. People are asking me, what's this capacityforgood.com? I tell them, why are you asking me if I told you it's capacityforgood.com? Clearly, if you just go there, you'll see that there's merch available for you to buy to support us. Hazaku Baruch. Okay, let us begin. My friends, the Pasuk tells us, Vayehi Yaakov. And Yaakov lived in the land of Mitzrayim. And it's important to understand what this means, and Yaakov lived. What does it mean, and Yaakov lived? In order to understand this idea, I want to perhaps point out something which I think is a little bit, maybe runs unnoticed. If you look in the Torah, you'll notice that at the end of every parasha, you have what's called a parasha stuma and a parasha ptucha. Most parashiyot in the Torah are ptucha. What that means is, if you start a line in the Sefer Torah, so the rest of that line is left blank before you start the new parasha, the new chapter, okay, the new week's portion. So there's an empty line there, like at the end of a chapter of a book, okay? If it's a parasha stuma, so we don't finish the line, we leave a space for 3 words, and after those 3 words, what do? We put the next, what's it called? The next parasha. So that's called the parasha stuma. It's closed. There's no space between the first story and the second story. Okay? Now, this idea, I think, has a halachic synonym. The halachic synonym for this is what's called toch kedei dibur. Let's say, as an example, I say Baruch Atah, and then I space out for a minute, 60 seconds. And then I say, Elokeinu melech haolam, and continue the blessing. If I take a pause in the middle of a prayer for a certain amount of time, that's what's called a hefsek. You took a break. How long do you have before you could go back? What's it called? Toch kedei dibur. So let's say I say the wrong ending. Baruch atah Hashem, hakel hakadosh. I'm supposed to say, hamelech hakadosh, right? Because it's during the 10 days of Teshuvah. So how long do you have to correct yourself? Toch kedei dibur, which means within the amount of speech, within the ability to say 3 words. Shalom alecha Rabbi. It's about 1.5 seconds, a little bit less than 2 seconds. That pause, okay, means that now I've put a wedge between what I said before and what's coming afterwards. So 3 words is the maximum that you could go, okay, or the space of 3 words before you have a hefsek, a break between these 2 things. So that's the halachic synonym. A parasha stuma is considered attached. The story is a run-on story. Okay? Now, I want to draw your attention to this halachic principle, because I think that there's something here which is off the charts. So what that means is that you're supposed to read this as one story. It's connected. On the other hand, what happens if you leave no spaces whatsoever? Also no good. So if you left it open, pasul. If you closed it completely, pasul. The Sefer Torah can't be used. You got to throw, whole Sefer Torah does not have a halacha of a Sefer Torah. Did you know that? So if bar minan, chas v'shalom, something happened to that Sefer Torah, there would be no laws associated with the Kedusha of the Sefer Torah. It's a holy document, of course, don't get me wrong, like a Chumash, but not like a Torah. So that means that this pasuk, if you don't have this, the Torah is not considered valid. My friends, I think that this is something that we all need to take a look at. That means that in something satum, in something that is closed, in something that has no space within it, there we say the words, Vayehi Yaakov. That Judaism defines life. How? It defines life by something which feels closed. Something where the person has no space to act. Something where there's no space, there's no road here, there's no road there. In the world, if we look at a person like that who's trapped, what do we say? What kind of life is this? Life is when I can do whatever I want. Life is when I'm not boxed in. Life is when I have options. But the Torah says something differently. Vayehi Yaakov, and Yaakov came alive as he moved down to Egypt, even though it was a very difficult thing for Yaakov to do. Now you have to remember, for a regular person, you move from Israel to Egypt, okay, you might be upset. You might not be happy that you're moving there. You're assuming that that's what Yaakov was feeling. However, you have to go back a little bit in the story of the Jewish people to understand the importance of this moment and the importance of these words. You see, when Abraham started the Jewish people, if you will, God told Abraham, he was understood in his prophecy, that God said to him, you should know that the Jewish people are going to go down to a country that does not belong to them, and they're going to serve them for 400 years, and they're going to be tortured. It's going to be terrible. We're going to go through the worst of circumstances. And when that's done, and after that, they'll leave with a great inheritance. Okay? So Yaakov Avinu looks around. He sees his family, all of them are being forced to uproot from their country. He knows that this is what Abraham was talking about. He knows that they're descending into a very deep and dark pit. Rashi says on these words, Vayehi Yaakov, it was stuma, it was closed. Why? Because once Yaakov Avinu passed away, Nistemu enehem shel Yisrael, the eyes of the Jewish people were closed. You know why? Because the story, the descent into the story of Egypt begins. So Yaakov is aware of what's happening. And yet, even though it's difficult, even though it's hard, what happens to Yaakov Avinu? Yaakov Avinu comes alive. Vatechi nefesh ruach Yaakov Avihem. Yaakov comes alive. He comes alive from the challenge, from the difficulty. I want to share with you something that I think is really interesting, because I think that that's really what we're reading about in this in this entire story. You know, the pasuk tells us that when Yosef came down to Yaakov Avinu, Yaakov Avinu, he gets up, he blesses him, he bows to Rosh Habitah, and the Baalei Tosafot point out that you see from here that it was a big deal that Yosef visited Yaakov. What do we see from here? You see from here that Yosef was not orphaned by his father. The children were growing up on Yaakov's lap, but Yosef, 22 years he's missing his dad. But he's not orphaned by his dad. He doesn't come a lot. The point is, why? It just says Shelo haya ragil. Tosafot says he didn't come often. Why? Why would that be the case? He was desperate to see his father. And I want you to hear the words of the Baalei Tosafot. He says, why? V'shamati mipi Rabbeinu Shemuel. Rabbeinu Shemuel taught, Lefi shehaya yaresh yish'al lo ha'inyan. Yosef was worried. If I sit with my father, one-on-one, just us, the two of us, and he asks me, what happened? What happened to you? How'd you get lost? How'd you disappear on me like that? 22 years, Yosef would have to tell him what happened. And Yosef remembers that when Yaakov Avinu said a word that he didn't even mean with Rachel, when Rachel took the idols of Lavan, Yaakov didn't know. He says, we don't have it. Whoever has it, you should die. We don't steal in this house. Not realizing that Rachel took them because she wanted her father to stop worshiping Avodah Zarah. What happened to Rachel? She passed away. Because the klala tzaddik, when he gives a bracha, he gives a blessing, or he gives a curse, those things, there's a reality to them, and they can do incredible blessing, incredible advantage, or have incredible detriment. Kilalat tzaddik afilu al tanai. The curse of a tzaddik, even if it's on a condition, it's a very scary thing. What could happen? Yosef says, if that's what happens when Yaakov doesn't mean it, what's going to happen when he then hears what the brothers did to me? What's he going to say to them? I always thought it's so interesting that we're learning here about the fact that Yosef says, I can't visit because I'm nervous that they're going to get cursed by Yaakov. And the fact that he stays away, what do we read immediately after this? How Yaakov gives all them blessings. So he's the one that makes sure that the relationship between his father and the brothers stays intact. He's the one that makes sure that Yaakov Avinu is blessing his sons, is blissfully unaware of the story that got Yosef here. My friends, you know what that means? That means that all this time, Yosef sacrificed a relationship that he wanted so much because he knew that it would hurt somebody else. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Who'd Yosef get that from? Rachel Imenu, his mother. When Rachel sacrifices, she says, if Leah is humiliated, she doesn't realize that Lavan's trying to switch Leah and Rachel. If she doesn't realize she's going to be humiliated, how can I do this to her? So Rachel is willing to give up everything because she doesn't want her sister to suffer the pain. Yosef learns a lesson and he stays back. My friends, you see from here again this idea. A lot of times a person says to themselves, you know what? This is what I need. This is what I want. How am I going to live like this? You can't live like this. But they don't realize that living doesn't mean getting what you want. Living means shining at life, winning at life, achieving greatness, even in, and sometimes specifically because of, the difficulties that surround our existence, the difficult choices that we make when we know they're right. And in the time, they might be painful, but when we know they're right, a person can come alive from those decisions. My friends, I think there's something incredible that we all need to see from here. There's a man, unbelievable story about a man called Feuerstein. This man, he ran something called Molden Mills. It was a shop, a place, a factory where they made fabric. It was in Massachusetts. Famous story. It was made famous more recently by a dear friend of mine, Rabbi Yoel Gold. Everyone here should watch the video. He has this factory, huge place, inherits it from his parents, okay? He's got 3,000 workers there. This massive place. One night, a fire breaks out in this factory, destroys the whole thing to the ground. The money, because it was a beautiful factory in Massachusetts, the payout from the insurance was $300 million. Okay? And he had choices. He was able to make a choice to decide whether or not he wanted to rebuild the factory where it was and hire the same workers, which would have taken out, a huge portion of the money he was being paid. That's why it was rated at that amount of money, because that's what it would cost to rebuild and to hire everybody. Or what he could have done is, he was an elderly man already, not elderly, but he was past retirement age. He was in his 70s. All he needed to do was go to the Bahamas, go to Barbados, go to Hawaii, go to Florida, cake to pay, and retire. $300 million. He's not going to spend that if he tried. Okay? Or he could move the factory down to Mexico, to China, build it for a fraction of the cost. Hire labor for a fraction of the cost. Everyone assumed that that's what he was going to do. Anyway, he calls a press conference the next day. He stands up there and he tells everyone, he says, I've decided I'm rebuilding the factory here. And every one of the workers is going to keep their jobs. And not only that, while I'm rebuilding the factory, in order that I can hold on to the workers that have been working here for years and years, I'm going to pay you all your salaries for the duration of the time that it takes to rebuild the factory. And people ask me, are you out of your mind? The first thought that people normally have is, $300 million payout, the guy set the fire himself. Right? My friends, not only is the integrity there, he didn't set the fire himself. He rebuilds it, spends all the insurance money to make sure that he puts the workers first. The worst possible business decision, but the best possible human decision. And he stands up there and says, and what if I had the money? What would I have done with it? You know, had another steak? How many steaks can you eat? I learned from my father in a place, and he says this on national television. He was recognized by Bill Clinton publicly. Not that you need the approbation on morality from Bill Clinton, but that he was held up as a shining example to the whole world by a president of the United States. Look at this man. Look at what he did. And he stands up and he says, I learned from my father. And on national TV, he says in Hebrew, Bimkoim she'ein, right? In a place, she'ein anoshim, in a place where there's no man, hishtadil liyos ish. Try, attempt, do your very best to be a man. Do you understand that? Do you understand what that means? That means in the difficult spots in your life, that's where you become a man. Is that clear? Now I want to point out something. I have a chat with one of the classes that I give. It's one of the ladies' classes that I give. I posted this video. And in the video, I posted the video. People are like, wow, such a beautiful video. I said, guys, my favorite part of the video is at 4 minutes and 37 seconds. And I want you to tell me why. Anyway, everyone's trying to guess in the group, what did I like about 4 minutes and 37 seconds? I'll give you a hint. He's walking with his cane in the road. That's it. And the camera's like a close-up. And they're all trying to guess, like that's your favorite part of the... He's not even talking. And they're all trying to guess till finally someone figured it out. Barbara Dabba was the one that caught it. If you look at his pants, this is 25 years after the fire. You look at his pants are frayed and torn. He's got a hole in his trousers. And it made me cry, because here's a man who owned a fabric company. He made the right decision. He made the honorable decision. He made the biggest Kiddush Hashem in the world. And now here's the guy with the clothing factory who doesn't have material to have a normal pair of pants. He's doing a video interview. You'd imagine the guy would wear a pair of pants. He doesn't have it. His pants are torn. And you know what? He could have been forgiven. Maybe I was a big man back then, but now that I don't have it, he could have regretted that decision. But in the interview, you see that 25 years later, with nothing, he still feels, he's still happy with the choice that he made. Vayehi Yaakov Avihem. My friends, you know what happens? Hishtadel liyot ish. You have to make your best attempt to be a man. My friends, how hard was it for Yosef? To have his father around the corner, but to know that if he goes to speak to him, that conversation is going to come up and he's going to cause yet another fight in the family. Yaakov's like, Yosef, I'm not doing it. The Pasuk tells us that when Yaakov came back across the river, right, to get those last few bottles, the last few vessels, Pachim Ktanim, what happens? He meets, right, this man. He meets the angel of Esav, and he wrestles with the angel of Esav. He wrestles with this man. Vayivater Yaakov levado, and Yaakov was left alone. Vayeavek ish imo, and a man wrestled with him. And there's many different interpretations as to what that means, and we've discussed it when we learned it back then. But I'd like to suggest an alternative understanding. Sometimes Yaakov, sometimes a Jew, is left alone. He's in a tight spot. If you want to be a good Jewish man or woman, you have to make a decision where you feel all by yourself, where you're left alone, where no one's on your side and everyone's telling you what you're doing is crazy. The people interviewing you are telling you it's a bad decision. The CEOs that are your friends are telling you that you're out of your mind. Everyone thinks you're crazy. Vayivater Yaakov levado. He found himself in a lonely position, doing something unpopular. Vayavik ish imo. And in that moment, Vayavik ish imo means, and he wrestled with a man. And I would like to interpret it. Vayavik ish imo. He wrestled with being a man. Hishtadeh lihiyot ish. Make that attempt to rise to the occasion. Yosef understands what happened with his family once. And Yosef says, even if it causes me pain, I'm not letting it happen again. The crazy thing is, even though in the short term, when a person makes the right decision, it might hurt. That is when we are most alive. That is most when we are expressing the fact that we're a man, a woman, a mensch, the right person, a good person. And I'll tell you, if in the short term it seems like you're losing, in the long term, you never lose from making the right choice. You might ask me, then how does Mr. Feuerstein have a ripped pair of pants? And the answer is, who says that he counts that as losing? Sometimes Vayivater Yaakov levado, but the greatest gift is that he rose to the occasion, and that brought him this life, the life of Olam Haba, a life of integrity, a life of communicating those values to your children, a life of being able to pass that on to the next generation. Is there any greater gift than that? Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen.